caught up with it. Apologies.
Welcome to Harlequin Property. Harlequin Property is one of the UK's leading international property investment companies. It provides the opportunity to invest in freehold properties by Harlequin Hotels and Resorts, a company which specialises in creating the finest luxury resorts in spectacular locations in the Caribbean and tourist destinations worldwide. Properties within its resorts are sold off plan at up to 50% below market value and have excellent potential for high capital appreciation and rental income. Harlequin selects locations where the property market is experiencing high capital growth, which is likely to continue, combined with the demand for hotel accommodation from an established tourist industry or which have been identified as new holiday destinations. The resorts will have the best design, amenities, management and marketing to bring the best possible rental rates and will be managed, maintained and marketed to deliver the highest possible occupancy. Harlequin Hotels and Resorts has appointed a management team with excellent reputations and proven track records for managing five-star hotels worldwide. With over 50 years of combined experience in the hotel industry around the globe, from the Waldorf Astoria in New York to Latouche Rock in Mauritius, the team will create a five-star luxury experience for every guest. The resorts are located in stunning Caribbean destinations: St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Barbados and the Dominican Republic. Properties range from well-appointed studios to luxury villas, all with the high standards and building specifications you would expect from a five-star resort. Stunning properties in unbelievably beautiful locations with the potential for high capital growth. A truly exceptional investment opportunity.
Wow, well, with an introduction like that, can I just have a show of hands, those of you who'd like to buy now? We have a conference special to make your checks payable to, well, actually it doesn't matter who you make your checks payable to, we'll just clear them through our client account. I'm Ian Richardson. I'm a director with Grant Thornton in the UK. I'd like to welcome you to this talk. David gave us the exceptionally snappy title of Fraudulent Corruption in the Caribbean. How was the 400 million Harlequin property scam allowed to go on for so long? And who can be held liable? We've shortened that title slightly to Harlequin Fraud or Farce, because although it was a fraud, it's also been farcical how long it's gone on for. With me on the stage is Dustin Delany, an attorney from Barbados, who's been acting for some investors trying to recover monies, and he's also had other involvements with Harlequin, but we'll let him address that in due course. At the time that I agreed to do this talk, I was confident that Grant Thornton would have been appointed as trustee and or liquidator of various Harlequin entities by now. As it happens, the best laid plans of mice and men always go awry, and KPMG pipped us to the post. So there's an element of sour grapes, but hey, if it had been me, I'd have done the same. What it does mean, of course, is that I don't actually have any confidentiality restrictions on me, so I can talk perhaps a bit more frankly than I would otherwise. Over to you, Dustin.
All right. Well, before I get started, Ian, I want to thank you and the Grant Thornton team for the work in getting all of this data together for today's discussion. As Dave Marchant stated in his opening remarks yesterday, transparency is the fraud killer. How was this scam able to go on for so long? Primarily due to the lack of transparency. And of course, in my opinion, we need a dubious character like Dave Ames to execute this, the scam, as this is an integral component. This story begins 12 years ago when the good Mr. Ames set up his first Harlequin company in the Caribbean in the jurisdiction of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, or SVG, which just happens to be my second country of citizenship through marriage. St. Vincent and the Grenadines is a small, developing island nation with a population of just under 100,000 at the time, and heavily reliant on tourism. So much so that at the time, the government put plans in place to build an international airport, which is quite an impressive undertaking considering the GDP per capita at the time was just hovering above $6,000. Needless to say, the news of a purported five-star resort, Bucama Bay, coming to the mainland St. Vincent was welcomed news. It gave Vincentians hope and optimism, which Ames parasitically utilized for his own advantage for years to come. My expectations with Harlequin diminished quickly. Unfortunately for my wife, she's not only married to an attorney, but she was fathered by one. Though at the time I was still based here in Miami, I worked frequently with my father-in-law in St. Vincent. My father-in-law is a good man, and he, like my wife, have an amazing talent for judging character. Without going any further, as to my father-in-law, and forgive my language, but he can smell shit a mile away. So there he was, circa 2006, and in walks Dave Ames into my father-in-law's office to talk about structuring land deals and setting up the Bucama Bay Resort, also hoping to access some credibility by not only retaining the island's top property lawyer, but also an attorney known for his honesty and integrity. This part of the story ends here. What was relayed to Dave Ames, to my father-in-law, defied legal logic, and my father-in-law stayed away despite being reapproached for years to come. Little did I know at the time that I would not be as lucky, in that Dave Ames and Harlequin would come in and out of my life for the next decade. It wasn't long after construction began on Bucama Bay that complaints quickly spread across the island that Harlequin was failing to pay suppliers. This was only the beginning, as Harlequin failed to pay suppliers, workers, its tax obligations for years to come. Fast forward a few years, it is 2009, and I have moved my law practice to Barbados, and I'm introduced to a rather brash Irishman by the name of Paddy O'Halloran, who had recently set up a construction company in Barbados called ICE Group. As it turns out, ICE Group was the newly appointed contractor for Bucama Bay and other Harlequin resorts in Barbados and St. Lucia. And there you go, Harlequin's back in my life. You hear more on O'Halloran in a bit. It is now 2012, and our firm starts receiving periodic inquiries over the next several years from a number of purchasers of Harlequin properties at Bucama Bay and St. Vincent and other projects. These inquiries pertain to investors who are unable to make any progress in the completion of their property agreements. At the time, having realized that Harlequin was not viable, or as in our title, a farce, we simply turned the work away. It is now 2015, and the UK office of one of the top 20 multinational firms that we do a lot of work for in the region contacts me and pleads with me to take on two of his clients who've been unable to make any progress with Harlequin or any of the local attorneys in the completion process. Like others who had contacted us for over the previous 3 years, a significant amount of the purchase prices were paid, completion dates were well past, and Harlequin continued to play games with one excuse after another, as we'll talk about shortly. Through 2015, our firm agreed to take on a total of 12 Harlequin investors, and we eventually had to shut off the spigot because, like everyone else, we were unable to obtain any results for the clients, despite repeated attempts to make progress with Harlequin and Dave Ames. Harlequin was not allowing completions to take place, and it became apparent to us that filing a lawsuit for the return of these monies paid to Harlequin was a matter of throwing good money after bad. There was already hundreds of thousands of dollars in registered judgments against the Harlequin property in St. Vincent alone. It is now October 2016, and Harlequin Property SVG Limited which owns the Bucama Bay Resort, as well as another resort in Barbados called Merrick's, filed under a protectionist provision in the St. Vincent Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, and we finally see the Harlequin scheme ready to unwind. These proceedings led to the current assignment in bankruptcy, which was ordered by the court back on February 24th. Since then, Harlequin has been a full-time job for me and other members of our firm in advising clients in these proceedings and getting ready for the remainder of the cards to fall with respect to the other Harlequin companies. There's no shortage of stories when it comes to Harlequin, and we could go on all day. However, Ian and I have put together a condensed overview of Harlequin, and we're going to be speaking to you on the following: the main characters, the promises made to investors, the corporate structure, the sales agreement and financing, the advisors, the regulators, the reality of what happened, Harlequin's response to complaints from customers and adverse media comments, investor actions to recover monies, Harlequin's litigation against others, the insolvency process, Bucama Bay's eventual closure, its current position, and Harlequin as a whole, investor prospects, and responsibility and accountability. Ian, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Dustin. Perhaps I've put the map up while you were talking. Perhaps you could explain the map for the audience who don't know that these are the locations where Harlequin proposed to build.
Sure, just to point out quickly, before I met my wife, like everyone else, I thought St. Vincent was a U.S. Virgin Island, but it actually exists way down here, just north of Trinidad. Bucama Bay was here. St. Lucia up here, where there's two properties, which is the Marquis Estate and the Blue Hotel, and then Barbados, which has the Merrick's Estate and the H Hotel, and then up in the Dominican Republic, which is the Hideaway, Las Canas, and what's the third?
There was three? I don't know.
Yes, we're still finding information out today, but I'll get to it.
So, let's have a look at our key players. First, of course, we have Mr. David Ames himself, and I'm going to follow this with a video from him. When asked a technical question by a High Court judge last year along the lines of, where is the missing 100 million? Where did the money go? His response was, quote, "They call me a visionary," unquote. In other words, don't come to me for detail. Visionary, possibly, but only because he was a double-glazing salesman. That's his only involvement with visions, and he was bankrupted twice as a result of those activities, which perhaps not the best credentials for building a multi-hundred million portfolio of properties across the Caribbean. In the middle is his trusty St. Vincent attorney, Mr. Sam Commission. You can search for yourselves his regulatory record, which is not pristine. Is that generous, Dustin? Or? Yeah, to say the least. And again, the judge in the High Court was quite scathing about his, let's just say, accuracy of statements. So we'll come on to that later on. And on the right, of course, is Dustin's good mate, Pordy O'Halloran, a.k.a. the Irish Builder. There's a supporting cast of wives, children. One of the Ames sons had his own Ponzi scheme that he went to jail for, and a number of professional advisors in the accounting and legal profession, and a variety of regulators, all of whom appeared to have thought it was a different regulator's responsibility to look at what was going on. So, but, having made that introduction, let's hear from the great man himself. I'm sorry, this is quite a long video, it's 10 minutes, so listen in, zone out as you see fit. In it, he makes the promises to investors. There'll be a short quiz afterwards to see who's listening and has kept track.
we're proud to announce that Harlequin Hotels and Resorts, as a 5-star brand, has been officially launched, and the fact that Buckingham Bay will open on time on the 1st of July 2010. What I'd like to explain to you now is the success of Harlequin model and how it's come together over the last 4 years and how we've got to be where we are today. Because when you come to invest in a project such as ours, what people always forget about is not so much the actual putting money into a project, but is what is at the end. What are you putting your money in, and how do you get your money out, and how does those incomes and that profit you're looking for long term comes out of the project. And so what I'd like to do is explain why this is different to people, why even in these difficult times the model is still successful and people are still investing every week with us in our projects throughout the Caribbean. Let me talk about our investors. What is important to understand here is that what we like to do for our investors is to make things affordable to them. So it's no good me staying here today and saying to you, you know, a property in the Caribbean is £1 million when the majority of people haven't got £1 million to invest. So what we had to do is come up with a different type of model that works for everybody, as I've mentioned earlier. And how it works for our investor is the fact that we make it very affordable to them. So what happens is we ask our investor to raise 30% of the property price. So let's just say they invest £100,000. What we look for them to do is to raise 30% of that, which is £30,000. Now let's just say that costs them to get a mortgage or a loan. Let's just say it's £250 a month. Well, what we then do, we actually pay that money back to the investor. So the time during the build, it doesn't actually cost them a penny out of their own bank. We're actually, the project, the resort, is paying for those payments for them. And why would we do that? If you think about it, Harlequin is a partner with our investor because Harlequin actually own the resort. So what happens is when we're renting their room, we actually share the percentage of the money from that room. So for example, with our investors, they receive 50% of the room rate after the second year. So what happens, for every, say, £100, our investor gets 50 and the resort gets £50. So it's in the hotel's interest, as well as our investor, to get as much money for that room as we can. So how do you do that? That is where our third party come in with our partners, is the fact that it's no good just building a beautiful resort, it's the most stunning resort in the Caribbean, and no one's going there. You know, that's no benefit to anybody either. Because when you have an investment like this, you need to fill the rooms and you need to generate income. So what we've done and how we've achieved that is by arranging to get, we feel, some of the best partners. And one of the issues that you have on travel side is that, yes, you can get some of the big branded name hotels to run your resort. What people are going to understand is that these companies are hotel management companies. The issue is that they will sell and run the resorts, but what they can't do is bring people in as such. And the strength we have with Oasis is they're part of a company called Globelia. Now the strength of Globelia is the fact that not only do they have 2,000 travel agents throughout America and Europe, they also have their own airline. They're the largest privately owned airline in Europe. So they're flying, you know, it's around 50 jets, wide-body jets at the moment, to and fro from Europe into the Caribbean. So not only do they run 50 hotels, they run their own airline and they run the travel agents, and they actually deal with every major tour company throughout America and Europe. So we feel confident that when we build this stunning resort, we will be able to bring the people in. So when we bring them in, what have we got to offer them? Well, we're pleased to say that we've got agreements with Liverpool Football Club, where we're opening soccer schools throughout the Caribbean with Liverpool. We have people like Gary Player. We're opening the first 5-star, in fact, it should be probably 6-star branded, Gary Player Hotel in the world. On top of that, we're actually building his first signature golf course in St. Lucia as well. So if you add people like Pat Cash, who obviously ex-Wimbledon champion, and you talk about Tradovix, who are one of the leading brands of 5-star resorts throughout the world, we have some of the finest eateries. We also have Senior Pico. We also have the famous Mai Tai Lounge. In addition to that, we've also created some new concepts. First being Ginger & Co., which is going to be a fusion Asian restaurant. We also have a fine Italian dining restaurant called Harlequin, which is actually Italian for Harlequin. So as you can see, what we've tried to do is make it more interesting. Rather than the bland, every evening you go and eat in the same restaurant, the same buffet, you can have choices. We have a number of different styles of restaurants for you to come and eat. Because if we're going to promise our investors a return from their money, you need to prove that you can do this. And we feel we've done that with our partners. But not only that, it's got to work for the country we're in as well. In the past, companies have tended to buy land in the Caribbean and sell it on at a profit. Well, that's not what we do at Harlequin. We like to work with the local people and work with the governments so that everybody is rewarded for the investment that we make in the Caribbean. In Buckingham Bay, we already at this moment in time are employing just under 1,000 local people building the resort. And when the hotel is open, we expect to be employing a further 1,500 to be running our resort. We've just signed a charter with the United Nations, whereby we're going to be working with the United Nations in countries like St Vincent, where we'll be teaching the locals how to produce the food locally to supply the five-star resort. And not only that, is to train the fishermen to catch the types of fish required in a five-star resort. So as you can see here, it's about putting something back into the country as well. And the great thing about that is the fact that when you're over in the country, they actually appreciate what we're doing. They know that we're not just over there trying to earn money. So that goes back to the whole key of the success of what we're putting together here, is the fact it works for all four people in our business model. It works for our investor, it works for Harlequin, it works for our partners in running the resort, but it works for the government as well. So when it comes to the investor, you know, what is in it for them? Well, the strength for us is the fact that, for example, in St Vincent, they're prepared to give us tax advantages to help us run a successful resort, which can help to actually give returns to the investor as well. Let me just step back to what you need to understand from 3 or 4 years ago when we first started to put this together. What we realised then is almost impossible for our investors to actually get a 70% mortgage in the Caribbean. It's not because no one wants to give it on it, it's just the fact they're not established enough, their markets and their banks are not established enough. So we understood and realised that we had to work to help our investor to actually raise that money, because obviously their property they've invested in is in the Caribbean, and banks in England don't give that. So what we had to do to explain to people is the fact that normally if you go and get a mortgage, the bank or the mortgage broker, mortgage company, would give you maybe 3 to 6 months to complete. Well, when you're selling 3 or 4 years ahead, it's obviously impossible to do that because no one knows what the rates are, whatever it is. What you need to understand is that let's just look at the worst way. Let's just say nobody, next year, all these people who bought in Buckingham Bay with us, they've now got the resort, it's now open on the 1st of July 2010, they are now due their 70%. What are we going to do? What reaction are we going to make to our investor? Well, the great thing is, if you think about it, the added bonus of this is the fact, if you look at Buckingham Bay, it will be, we imagine the value is going to be between 300 to 400 million US dollars. Now, the great thing is, because of our business model, how it works, we don't have any borrowings on that. It's completely unencumbered. So when we have an asset like this, you know, we personally could go to a bank to borrow money on that. And because it is one mortgage on one security, we know we can get a much better rate, which we can pass to our investor. But let's just say the banks don't want to give the money to us. So let's look at how things will be next July, right? So on the 1st of July 2010, we open the doors, we give all the keys to our investors. What happens then? Well, the great thing is, because our investors, the resort is not just sitting there empty. For the year prior to that, we're actually taking bookings. So we imagine, let's say the resort is 50% occupied from the 1st of July 2010. We have an income coming in. We have 200 people, 200 rooms occupied. We have bars, we have restaurants. So what has happened? We're actually generating an income already. But because we don't have any mortgage or loans, that money is free money. So what we then have to do is that we've promised 10% rental guarantee to our investor for the first 2 years. So let's just say that the mortgage, as I said earlier, on a property, the 30% was 250. Let's just say the mortgage now is £750 a month for the 70%. Well, the great thing is we owe them 10% for the income from their room. So let's call that £1,000 that we actually owe the client. They actually owe us £750 for the mortgage. So if you think about it, the actual rental income that you're generating actually covers the 10%. So technically, we don't actually need to raise any money from our investor or from our point of view. So the great thing is, from our investor's point of view, you haven't got to worry about what's going to happen with the 70% mortgage. You don't need to find that. We feel confident we will be able to get that anyway.
I mean, I'm glad you all picked up that he was going to teach the fishermen how to catch the right sort of fish. I just thought that was beautiful. So, rather than making you take notes, here's the promises he makes. So, they're affordable. It's only a 30% deposit. And if you have to remortgage your house to raise that 30% deposit, he will pay the mortgage for you until the property is completed. Now, I'm sorry, but as soon as you say that, that's a Ponzi scheme, because the company's got no income, and yet it's paying money out to existing investors. I'm sorry, it's Ponzi at that point forward. A fact which escaped one or two regulators, auditors, and firms of solicitors, but hey-ho, no one's an expert. On completion, he says there, we're confident we can get you a 70% mortgage. Actually, it was guaranteed in the paperwork. So his rental guarantees is 10% yield years 1 and 2, and that will exceed the mortgage cost, and therefore you cash in straight away because the resort is profitable, and you get an income share of 50% of the revenues from years 3 onwards, and there's a flying pig with a golden crown going past the window. But that was what was told to investors, and that was on the basis a whole army of independent financial advisors in the UK went and started flogging the thing to investors. So the corporate structure, very simple. There wasn't one. You had a UK company, I've just used the abbreviations here, Harlequin Management Services Southeast Limited, which we all call HMSSE. So that was the sales agent company in the UK. Carol was the director. David wasn't the director. Carol, who's, according to what the testimony she gave the judge, all she did was type emails for Dave. She didn't read them, she just typed them. And yet she ran that company. That company was a sales agent. So if you signed up with Harlequin for a £100,000 property and paid the £30,000 deposit, either from your cash reserves or from a remortgage or from your pension fund, Harlequin in the UK would take a 20% sales commission. That's 20% of the 100,000, not 20% of the 30,000. So your 30,000, 20 of it immediately goes in commission back to the UK, and they share that with their sub-agent. So you got 10,000 left. In the Caribbean, the RDC is an abbreviation for Resort Development Companies. I apologise, this thing's been going on for so long, it is all jargon. And David was a director of each of those, so they were in St. Vincent or Barbados or wherever, St. Lucia, Brazil. They were the ones that entered into individual investors for the sales contracts. The problem is there was a little bit of an inconsistency. So you might be doing a deal with Harlequin in St. Vincent to buy a property in Barbados. And that's something that Dustin and his ilk are going to have to sort out in the future. Of course, there weren't any consolidated accounts. The UK company was so large, because it was so profitable, making 20% on all these units that it was selling that were never going to get built, that it needed to have an audit. They were always qualified, because the auditors were never happy that the books and records were correct. But there's 2/5 of bugger all in terms of accounting information in the Caribbean. A few things float out from time to time, all of which show that the companies had huge liabilities in terms of what they owed to investors and precious little in the way of assets other than intercompany loans. And that was partially because, although you might be contracting with Harlequin in St. Vincent, and let's say for us it's St. Vincent property, to be optimistic, the fact was Harlequin then just pooled your cash straight away and then felt free to use it on whatever project they saw fit. Now that wasn't in the contract, but in later years there was a disclosure note. So none of this holding funds in escrow or any sort of entity by entity accounting. No, it just went into one big David Ames pool. I've mentioned the 20% that was paid. There was 10% left to cover building costs and investor mortgage payments. Oh, and by the way, despite Mr. Ames' best optimism, Buckingham Bay was never profitable and always needed money pumping in, not least of which was to get Andy Townsend, the footballer at the start, Pat Cash, Gary Player, Uncle Tom Cobley and all to come out and promote the brand. And then, of course, if you actually looked at the audited accounts in the UK, which were qualified, you could then see that they'd lifted about 5 million sterling to go and buy properties for the Ames family personally across in Dubai and Thailand. There was a note to the accounts that the auditors were so horrified at that they got the Ames to sign the management letter saying, oh, they'd been bought in their names, but they were really held on trust for the company. The liquidator of that company will tell you that wasn't quite the case at the end of the day. They had professional advisors, Wilkins Kennedy, accountants in the UK, BDO, accountants in the UK after Wilkins Kennedy, and were accountants from time to time in the Caribbean. For the avoidance of doubt, there is no criticism aimed at BDO whatsoever. I didn't say that about the first firm, did I? Legal, Sam Commission, I'm sure Dustin will tell us more later on about him, in St Vincent. In the UK, they had DLA. DLA, as with BDO, had a look at it, didn't like what they saw, and walked. Now, I've got mates who are partners at DLA and say, you've got to be pretty bad for that to happen. You know, normally they'll hang around and take some fees off you whilst telling you how bad they are, but they walked. But they engaged Nabarro. I've used Nabarro myself, but Nabarro were the attack dogs who went against the investors, and Carter Ruck, of course, who went against the media. We'll talk about that a bit more. We have some regulators. So in the UK, we have this thing called the Department of Trade and Industry, which then changed its name to Business Enterprise and Regulation, then Business Innovation and Skills, and is now Business, I can't remember, Business Enterprise, that is Innovation Skills, I can't remember. They change the name every year. They don't do anything. But they have this thing called the Companies Investigation Branch. And what does Companies Investigation Branch do? It investigates live companies that are a risk to the public, and it closes them down. Now, they're also very secretive about what they do and don't like letting their reports out. I did press very hard a few years ago to one of the solicitors who works with them regularly, and she confirmed that CIB, Companies Investigation Branch, had been out to have a look at them, hadn't liked what they'd seen, but didn't feel they could do anything because none of the contracts were actually being signed with a UK company. So although the UK company was a sales agent, because they were contracting with St Vincent companies, St Lucian companies, Brazilian companies, not that they had any land in Brazil, but that's a minor issue. So CIB felt they couldn't look at it. So then we get the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, who also changed the name previously, the Financial Services Authority. Why are they interested? Well, because a lot of the investors bought the units through their pension fund. So the deal was, let's say you're a nurse with the NHS, you've built up a retirement pension pot that has got a value of £100,000. Now, you all know that's going to pay you like £1,500, £2,000 a year in retirement if you're lucky, so it's not really worth having. So your local IFA would come along and say, well, rather than having that, why not put it into something like Harlequin? And of course, I'm not mentioning the fact that he was getting half of Harlequin's commission for doing that sale. And the sale of pension products is a regulated investment in the UK, and it has then you're potentially entitled to compensation, and so the FCA should have been looking at this earlier. To be fair, they probably were the first agency that actually did anything, but they let a fair bit of time go. And then the Serious Fraud Office, a colleague and I went to see the SFO in 2012 with all the public stuff that was there. We didn't have any secret stuff, we just had all the public stuff that was just fairly obvious that a crime was taking place, that people were being defrauded. It couldn't, with the mortgage payment guarantees, it couldn't be anything other than a Ponzi scheme. And the SFO took another year before they announced an investigation. That's my bit for the moment. What about any regulation in the Caribbean, Dustin?
Well, there's been little to no regulatory action in the Caribbean. Most of the active part of the scheme I guess as the Caribbean looks at it, took outside of the region in the UK. Though, as was mentioned earlier, I believe, if we haven't touched upon it yet, the good Mr. Ames is facing tax-related charges in St. Vincent. In my opinion, there are several reasons for the lack of regulatory action in the Caribbean. First, there's a deference to the UK regulators, who have a more solid jurisdiction over the individuals involved, and of course they're more resourced. Second, I believe this illustrates somewhat of a void in that all the Caribbean jurisdictions concerned have pretty decent regulatory bodies that oversee the international business and financial services sector, but nothing parallel that operates as efficiently in a domestic capacity. Thirdly, of course, there is the optimism that accompanies the existence of large-scale five-star resorts to these small developing island nations that would create hundreds of jobs, bring much-needed foreign exchange into the islands, and further enhance the respective tourism offerings of each island. For St. Vincent, this was critical, given that the construction of the new international airport was progressing to completion. Now, on that note, let's talk about Bucama Bay and St. Vincent, since this was the only property that experienced any meaningful construction activity. Let me point out that Ames is not an idiot. He is a deviant master manipulator and spin master, but not even these talents could keep Harlequin afloat forever. His achievements as a developer include 25% completion of Bucama Bay, absolutely nothing at Merrick's in Barbados, despite several groundbreaking ceremonies.
But Dustin, there's a fantastic photo of a Barbados development there.
Yeah, that was from my ice group days. That property, if I remember correctly, was not even actually on Merrick's. It was being constructed off-site, totally unrelated to the project, but had kind of the semblance of what was going to be built on the property. So they took it and ran with it.
Sorry, Dustin.
No problem. We have absolutely nothing at the Marquis Estate in St. Lucia. We have a partially renovated H Hotel in Barbados that exists as an oceanfront exposed superstructure that has not seen any activity for a number of years. A Blue Hotel in St. Lucia that was to be completely renovated but was slapped with a coat of paint. Nothing in the Dominican Republic, and not even confirmation that Harlequin owned land in Jamaica, as Harlequin reportedly sold thousands of units there. Now, for Harlequin and Dave Ames, selling units on land not owned by Harlequin, as we will see, was not a problem for them. Neither was selling the same unit to different purchasers. Of our 12 original investors in 2015, we had 2 that were sold the same exact unit at Bucama Bay. And to make it even worse, that unit was on property that Harlequin did not even own yet. Going back to the issue of transparency, as Harlequin exists today, now in its 3rd month of bankruptcy, there's still a lot we don't know. What we have known for quite some time is that Harlequin not only sold units at Bucama Bay on land it did not own, but also had no problem constructing units on land unowned. If it wasn't bad enough, we even caught Harlequin on multiple occasions double selling units. As more information becomes available and our client base grows, we anticipate finding more of this and would not be surprised to find even triple or quadruple selling of units. As you'll hear, eventually, Harlequin began channeling all of its investors from the other projects into Bucama Bay. In our office, we eventually discovered about 2 years ago that the two of the main lots at Bucama Bay, lots 18 and 20, where a number of units were sold, were not titled to Harlequin, and even today remain untitled. Just 2 weeks ago, we learned the possibility of an additional lot, lot 16, that may also not be owned by Harlequin, despite the fact that there were lots of units sold and even some construction activity on 16. We also learned that an entire phase of the development, where all lots 16, 18, and 20 are located, does not have proper subdivision approval from the government. One situation that Ian finds most entertaining is what has been dubbed the Rasta lands, which form part of the development towards the front. And those Rastafarians have stated in no uncertain terms that they're willing to die to stay on their land, which of course is an integral component of their existence. Today, the Rastas still have their land, but it is a bit awkward with the mess of a resort that sits as its neighbor. Needless to say, all of this is a bit complicating for units purchased on these lots. One common trend we see in these schemes is that the perpetrator is always trying to buy time, and Ames was a master. Back in 2010, during the ICE Group days, I said to myself the Harlequin House of Cards would fall by 2012. I was wrong. Ames kept that house of cards in place for another 5 years. Harlequin started buying time in 2008, when it terminated its arrangement with the initial contractor, Ridgeview, for Bucama Bay, and went on to utilize ICE Group and O'Halloran, who apparently was involved with Ridgeview, and offered to Ames to set up his company and further the construction, which Ames agreed. To the best of my knowledge, O'Halloran did not have any prior experience operating construction companies. In hindsight, maybe Ames thought this was to his advantage. During my time advising ICE Group, which was the latter part of 2009 into the front part of 2010, Ames and O'Halloran appeared quite close, so much so that they utilized the same accounting firm, the Wilkins Kennedy, that was mentioned earlier. From the outside, it seemed to make sense, in that both Ames and O'Halloran did not seem to have an idea of what they were doing, and the accountants seemed to be trying to sort out the mess. However, before the mess was sorted out, sometime in the beginning of May 2010, and what I can only describe as being surgically precise, O'Halloran wakes to freezing orders against him personally and all his companies in the Caribbean, the UK, and Ireland. And he was served with a claim by Harlequin alleging misappropriation to the tune of $26.1 million of a reported $100.6 million paid to him, which led to a judgment in the Irish court of about $2 million, I believe. This litigation itself is worthy of its own panel discussion, with stories of O'Halloran's fiancée having an affair with one of the female Wilkins Kennedy staffers, O'Halloran blowing thousands of dollars in Las Vegas and calling up the ICE Group accountant to wire more money, and a lavish wedding in the UK, as well as ICE Group's construction at the Bucama Bay site being more of a movie set than actual substantive construction. The most surprising component of this case, which seemed to have surprised the judge more than anyone else, was that despite over $100 million being paid to ICE Group, there was no contract in place between ICE Group and Harlequin. Dave Ames did not want one. He did not like contracts. He did not like paperwork, except his own agreements. Though I believe the ICE Group judgment itself was uncollectible, it bought something for Harlequin more valuable to them, and that was more time. In fact, it bought them a few more years. And meanwhile, as the litigation with ICE Group was blooming, Bucama Bay had a soft opening in the summer of 2010 and eventually opened later in the year. It was never fully constructed. In fact, as I mentioned, it was only 25 completed, despite being oversold years ago. Ian?
I think soft opening's right. Some of the ground was very soft, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because Pordy hadn't built the drainage outside of the units. He'd run out of time, he'd run out of money, and so the sewage came out of the units that he had built, and he just landscaped it. And clearly it worked for a day or two, but after that it had to be all dug up again. So, but at least it opened. Perhaps it shouldn't have, but it did. But that's it, as Dustin says, just nothing else was built anywhere. There's a shell on Barbados, but nothing else. So customers who'd signed contracts in 05, 06, 07 that had a 2 or 3 year lead time on, quite naturally were getting a bit pissed off by the time 2010, 2011 comes and goes, because the properties aren't being built and they aren't being transferred. So they started complaining, as you would do, but of course the first response that you got was, we can't guarantee we're going to build in Barbados, but we have opened already in Buckingham Bay. Why don't you take one of those instead? And some people did, but at least they could see something happened there, and there was a hotel that was open. But as the judge found in the UK case a few years later, of course, they'd sold about 20,000 more units than they were ever planning on building in the first place, and so that wasn't going anywhere. They like to blame others. They like to blame O'Halloran. The blame from O'Halloran led to the blame against Wilkins Kennedy. And if a customer was particularly aggressive, then Nabarro would jump up and down and tell them that they had to shut up or suffer the consequences. A fair bit of media comments. If you go back to 2009, you can find an apology in The Guardian for suggesting that Harlequin wasn't going to build in time. I've never managed to find the original article, nor speak to the journalist who wrote it, but you can still find the retraction on the site, because they'd been approached by Carter Ruck. Does anyone know of Carter Ruck? So it's a UK verb, to be Carter Rucked, to be Carter Rucked over, to be well and truly Carter Rucked. They are specialists in defamation proceedings, and anyone who raised a bad word about Harlequin were dealt with, professionally, legally, legitimately. The Singing Pig, which you probably won't have heard of, was an investor website that was quite entertaining and quite informative in the UK. He made the mistake of hosting too many pages that were critical of Harlequin, and Carter Ruck just jumped on him from a great height, and he ended up being bankrupted with a massive damages claim against him because he couldn't prove the allegations that were written on the website, and Harlequin obviously lied to Carter Ruck, and those messages got passed on to the court. Then there was the website, Harlequin, set up in conjunction. I think the people who were smiling at the front know about the Wilkins-Kennedy connection, but there was a lady involved there who'd had the misfortune to get a divorce settlement of a few £100,000, and she asked her financial advisor what to do with it, and he said, why not put it into Harlequin, and you'll get a good capital return whilst you decide what to do with it. So I think she started it, and then the Wilkins-Kennedy guys, because they'd fallen out with Harlequin by this stage, got involved, and that was quite vociferous for a while, but eventually got closed down, and they're quite good IT skills, the Harlequin boys. I'm a forensic accountant, as well as a liquidator. One of the tools I use is Way Back When, where you can look at historic websites to see what lies were told in the past that don't exist anymore. You can't find any of that on Harlequin. They've set up their website in such a way that the robots can't crawl over it and capture the images. And once they got into Harlequin, they closed that one down as well, and you can't find any images that you didn't save at the time there as well. They would have loved to have had a go at the Barbados Free Press, but they were outside the jurisdiction, and quite frankly, I don't think they gave a damn, did they, Dustin?
I don't think so.
So the Harlequin website went as well, and it bought them a few more years, as Dustin said. But I think Dustin's going to look at what investors did try and do next.
Yeah, from a legal standpoint, everything was wrong here, and a big part of the problem was that there were no attorneys involved looking out for the interest of the investors until it was too late, especially when they first entered these contracts. I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot of these investors are to blame too. Many entered into these agreements, paid the 30% deposits or even more of the purchase price and related costs without even the consultation of an attorney or any meaningful due diligence. It was high-pressure sales tactics, and they say that Dave Ames could sell ice to Eskimos. When Harlequin started running out of funds, they would squeeze investors for more money. Some clients paid up to 100% of the purchase price. Some even went above and beyond that and were coaxed into even paying their own attorney's fees in advance to Harlequin, because Dave Ames was such a nice guy, he was going to go find them an attorney to do the completion for them. It really, some of the things we've seen, just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, there were people purchasing entering into new contracts as recent as September 26, when a simple Google search would have given you pages and pages of indications to stay away from this fellow. Despite primarily having a UK client base, the Harlequin agreements were governed by local law. But these agreements, though they were likely enforceable in the Caribbean jurisdictions, in no way, shape, or form were consistent with local practice, and this just added to the mess. What we found out over the years is that despite Harlequin having agreements with investors that required written consent of both parties for any modification, Harlequin was assigning its properties and agreements unilaterally to its other companies. Original contracts for Bucama Bay were in the name of Bucama Bay Resort Limited, but unbeknownst to most of the investors, assigned to the company currently in bankruptcy, Harlequin Property SVG Limited. As recent as this November 2016, with respect to the Blue Hotel in St. Lucia, as there are pending winding up petition in St. Lucia against that company, Harlequin sends notices out stating that the Blue Hotel is actually owned by a whole different entity we never heard of, Harlequin Boutique Hotels Limited. And Harlequin Resorts St. Lucia Limited was just the seller's agent. In response to that notice, of course, our office, as well as the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, which you'll hear about, requested some evidence of this purported assignment, and we're still waiting today. Another part of this November 2016 notice from Harlequin contained another Harlequin pressure technique in forcing investors to pay more funds. Ames did this for years with Bucama Bay and was now utilizing this technique in St. Lucia. This is his repudiation approach, threatening investors that the completion date has come and gone, of course without a deliverable unit, and that Harlequin was quote-unquote ready and willing to complete. If additional funds were not paid by X date, Harlequin would treat the agreement as being repudiated, and the investor would forfeit all funds paid. Of course, for the attorneys in the room, we know the standard for repudiation is not ready and willing, it's ready, willing, and able. So the investors who are smart enough to go seek legal counsel on this, competent legal counsel, I should say, because that has been an issue, would call Harlequin out on the able part, and they would usually drop that argument and try to move on for something else. The story gets better. As time expires on Ames throwing ICE Group under the bus, as a few years have passed, Ames gets a bit creative here, and he sets two plans in motion. First, he starts to acknowledge, as Ian had referenced a moment ago, that the other developments would not be proceeding, and that Bucama Bay was the only viable project within the Harlequin group. Being the good guy that Dave Ames is, he offers to allow all the investors in these other projects in Barbados, the Dominican Republic, and St. Lucia to enter into a cancellation agreement and put those monies paid for those other projects towards a property purchase at Bucama Bay, and enter into an entirely new agreement for the Bucama Bay property. Of course, this required the further payment of a finance charge or administrative charge, depending on what version of the cancellation agreement you were provided, and usually the payment of more monies over to Harlequin. This resulted in hundreds, if not thousands, of investors being redirected to Bucama Bay, which was already oversold, and again, only constructed at 25%. We still don't know the exact total number of investors of those redirected in Bucama Bay. In 2011, Harlequin represented that they sold over 6,000 units. They continued to sell units right up until September of 2016. So God knows what that number actually stands at. And who knows, they've got these other companies that are not involved in any proceedings. They could still be selling properties at Blue and St. Lucia, the mysterious property in Jamaica, and we haven't even mentioned Brazil yet. He was selling lots of properties in Brazil, and I don't think there's been any confirmation of land ownership in Brazil. What we do know now is that Ames, again, he's not an idiot. By doing this, Ames has now packaged most of his liabilities conveniently within one company, and that's the company now that has been assigned in bankruptcy. Going back to buying time, as these additional funds started to trickle in, it provides Ames some additional resources, and Wilkins Kennedy comes back into the picture about 5 years after their resignation as Harlequin's accountants. I'll turn it back to Ian for the saga that is the Wilkins Kennedy case.
Yeah, so sorry, I've probably got the slides a bit slow there. So we've talked about the litigation that they took and the freezing orders against O'Halloran in St Vincent and in Ireland. But what they also then did was they learnt of the fact that there was a very close relationship. I wasn't quite sure, I hadn't heard about the relationship between Paulie's girlfriend and the WK staffy before, between ICE and Wilkins Kennedy, and they worked out that they'd paid far too much money for what had been built. And so Mr. Ames decides to pursue Wilkins Kennedy for about 70 million US in compensation, saying that Wilkins Kennedy weren't just their accountants and auditors, but in fact the partner responsible was the de facto project manager and financial controller of the whole Harlequin group, and therefore he had they'd breached those duties. It didn't help that although Wilkins Kennedy's defense was no, we were just your accountants and tax advisors, when they sent the termination letter saying they were no longer acting in about June 2010, it did say, we will no longer advise you on construction in St Vincent. So a bit of a weakness there. Perhaps they were doing more than they admitted. Anyway, cut a long story short, because I'm conscious we're dashing through our time here. This case took many years to get to court, cost many millions. Ames was always going on about he was going to get 70 million, he was going to use it to finish Bucama Bay, he was going to use it to build the other resorts. It was all everybody else's fault with him. So there was a hearing in the UK's Technology and Construction Court last year. They came out to sit in St Vincent for a week in about July last year, and to add some entertainment to the farcical programme. At that point, the St Vincent government lost patience with Ames and issued criminal proceedings against him for non-payment of about, I think it's 2 million US in local taxes. For whatever reason, although an arrest warrant was issued against Ames and the airport was notified, the harbours weren't notified. and he was able to escape on a skiff to a different island and then fly out from there. For some reason, Mr. Ames hasn't been back to St. Vincent since then. Interesting that. Anyway, so the court hears this, and if I just quote from the Court of Appeal judgment, which was the conduct of both parties has been reprehensible, I think says it all. The court considered that Wilkins Kennedy had breached every client, professional advisor duty under the sun, putting the interests of the ICE group ahead of that of Harlequin, but also that the Harlequin program was a facade. It was never going to be successful. Harlequin lost on 4 out of its 5 claims. It won one section of the claim, which was that Wilkins Kennedy should have told them they had to get a contract in writing with O'Halloran, and then discounted the damages award by 50%, because they said even if Wilkins Kennedy had told Ames to do that, he probably wouldn't have. So there you are. So what then comes out in round figures is that Harlequin gets a 10 million sterling award. And okay, it's not quite 70 million, but that's good enough for David Ames to claim a victory. But only then do we find out that 4 million of that has to go to repay litigation funders. And another 4 million has to go to his solicitors because they're under a, I forgot what it's called, a DBA, where they get a percentage of the award rather than a fixed fee or a time cost plus uplift. It's a straightforward percentage, and they're entitled to 40% of the award. So you're down to 2 million, and then you get other lawyers coming out of the woodwork. Goodbody in Ireland, who'd had the proceedings against O'Halloran that had never been paid for, and Nabarro again, who still had a few $100,000 owing to them for fighting off investors. I mean, this is where it really does get, even as an observer, it's painful, the idea that investors' money is being used to pay lawyers to fight the investors, to prevent the investors getting contractual fulfillment. I'm an insolvency practitioner, I see some nasty things, but hey. So the bottom line is, there was going to be next to nothing left for Harlequin. The judge pointed out that Ames had offered to accept, I think it was $9.5 million in full and final settlement in the middle of 16. In the end, he withdrew that offer. But at this same time, he's telling people, I'm going for 70 million. I'm going for 70 million. I'm not going to take less. So it was a disaster, I'm afraid. So we have got some insolvency processes. I think we've got only 10 minutes, Dustin, so we better dash on. So the sales agency company goes into liquidation in 2011 in the UK. I tried to persuade some of the investors to wind up this St. Vincent company using UK legislation, which you can do, unless you have Mr. Commission telling lies in affidavits as to the effectiveness of the recognition of UK law, of UK orders in St. Vincent. I think if we'd thrown more ammunition at that at the time, perhaps we'd have done better, but we are where we are. Those same investors, and this is not the pension guys, because the pension guys have got an indemnity fund from the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. These were investors who'd put their own money in. They might have remortgaged, but of course Harlequin had stopped paying the mortgage payments in breach of Mr. Ames' commitments. So these were guys who put their own funds together and raised a couple of $100,000 US to pursue HPSVG in St. Vincent, just to try and push it over. Sorry, I'm getting into your territory there, Dustin. You tell us what happened in St. Vincent.
Sure. Going back to the Wilkins Kennedy case, going back to buying time, the case was filed with 2014, 2015, went to trial last June. And Ames touted this case as Harlequin's savior. Wilkins Kennedy did us wrong. I'm not accepting $1 less than $70 million. And of course, he boasted at one point saying that Wilkins Kennedy put $30 million on the table pre-trial. He'd have nothing short of $70 million. And of course, as we've seen, the verdict fell well short of this. But it didn't stop the spin master from sending out notices to the investors of how victorious Harlequin was in the proceedings and how Harlequin got justice for the investors. In reality, as to the Wilkins Kennedy case, I believed all along and advised our clients at the time that the Wilkins Kennedy case would probably be Harlequin's last stand. It was, as we see now, the beginning of the end for Harlequin, and as we'll likely see in the future, the information that came out during the Wilkins Kennedy trial will eventually be what sinks the ship and potentially result in jail time for David Ames. When it comes to the Ames family, the apple doesn't fall from the tree. As Ian had indicated, Ames's son Matt was jailed 3 years ago for cheating investors out of £1.6 million on a bogus rainforest protection scheme. So if David ends up going to jail, he can get some pointers from his son Matt. As I mentioned earlier, Harlequin Property SVG Limited, which owns Bucama Bay and Merricks in Barbados, is in full-blown bankruptcy. And the house of cards continues to fall as there are winding up proceedings in St. Lucia, as I mentioned, and eventually Harlequin Boutique Hotels Limited and the other companies will fall into the mix. It's yet to be seen whether these will become consolidated cross-border proceedings or exist separately. One thing that complicates matters is that both Barbados and St. Vincent have a new Canadian-based Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act in place, whereas St. Lucia does not have a BIA, and those proceedings are under a winding up provision in the Companies Act. To complicate things slightly further, St. Lucia, because of its French roots, is a hybrid civil common law jurisdiction, whereas Barbados and St. Vincent are pure common law. Even in the proposal proceedings filed by Harlequin back in October, Harlequin was buying time under the BIA. It only gave them 6 months, but this was cut short on February 24th when the court saw through Harlequin's abuse of the proposal proceedings and ordered them into bankruptcy. The Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act permitted Harlequin under this proposal provision to request extensions, which as predicted, they took full advantage of. However, on the last application made for an extension back in February, the tide had turned on Harlequin as both the proposal trustee and the St. Vincent government pulled their support for the proposal. And Harlequin was before a different judge this time, a highly respected Queen's Counsel sitting temporarily in St. Vincent. And this new judge was not as tolerant as the previous judge and ordered Harlequin into bankruptcy. To this day, Harlequin have failed to file cash flow statements that were required to be filed back in October, 10 days after filing the notice of intention to file the proposal, and have also still to this date failed to file the statement of affairs that is required to be submitted to the supervisor of insolvency after the bankruptcy. The BIA permits the supervisor or the trustee to conduct an examination of a Harlequin representative. So the next big date on the calendar will be the examination of Dave Ames, which will likely take place in the UK. Why? Well, Ian's already touched upon that. He can't go to St. Vincent. There's an arrest warrant out for him, but he also cannot leave the UK because the good Mr. Ames was finally charged by the Serious Fraud Office in the UK, and as I understand it, has been ordered to surrender his passport and stay in the UK. The proposal proceedings themselves lasted just 4 months, and these were also rather peculiar. Harlequin never filed a proposal, though they claim they were working on one that would put ownership of the resort in the hands of the investors, because Dave Ames is just that kind of guy. It has also come to our attention that during this proposal process, Harlequin allowed some completions to take place, but we're not even sure, to take place with certain attorneys, but we have no clue where these funds went. It does not appear they went to the estate. We don't even know. We think the proposal trustee was totally unaware that Harlequin was continuing to transact, though it had sought protection under the proposal proceedings. My relationship with Ames has always been a rocky one. I would frequently call him out on his shortcomings, and his response was usually a month or two of silent treatment, and then he would circle back. We had clients ready, willing, and able to complete for well over a year, and Ames refused to allow these transactions to complete. The only time we ever received notification to complete was back in February, just hours after Ames was charged by the Serious Fraud Office. And we received over a dozen urgent emails from one of his attorneys for immediate attention to complete, only to be retracted a couple days later. The good news, insofar as Harlequin Property SVG Limited is concerned, Ames is out and there's a trustee in place. Unfortunately, it's not our friends at Grant Thornton.
Right, I'm conscious that we're eating into the next session, so I might just wrap up quickly.
Sure.
So prospects, you know, he's managed to convert more than £400 million into perhaps £20 million of assets, and who knows what they'll actually cost to realise, because there's quite a few legal issues there. The FSCS are bailing out individual pension fund investors in the UK. Their bill is currently 98 million in compensation, and it's expected to go well past 100. David did ask, when we first talked about this session, it was the idea of, well, he was looking for an investors meet funders idea as to, you know, could anybody be held accountable? Could anybody be responsible for this? I haven't even got the Ames family up there, because quite clearly they will be bankrupted, and there'll be a massive asset tracing exercise, and all the properties and all the cash that they've got will be gathered back in. But what that will be at the end of the day, we don't know. The question I had is, I'm sure that none of the advisors have done anything legally wrong. I'm sure that they've just all followed the information they were given by their client. But if DLA could smell a rat, why didn't others smell a rat? And had somebody not gagged the press back in 2009, how much less money would have been lost by investors into the Harlequin scam? Now, I don't know that any professional advisor has got a responsibility to as yet unknown potential investors, but it doesn't sit well with the idea that, you know, there were people whistleblowing, there were people waving red flags, and investors' own money was used to stamp them down very hard and very quickly. I struggled to find an image of a Harlequin. There it is. I've said questions, but I'm very conscious that we're eating into somebody else's speaking time. So if you want to